Evolutionists claim that the coal we use was formed slowly and gradually over the past 300 million years beneath the surface of the planet. What they seem to ignore is that coal has been created in the lab in just a few hours. It doesn't take years, let alone hundreds of millions of years. They claim that the coal deposits are the remains of swamps, but they seem to ignore the fact that many coal beds contain plants from dry environments and fossils of oceanic creatures. We find layers of shale between layers of coal, which evolutionists claim took millions of years to accumulate, but we also see polystrate trees spanning all of these layers. How could they possibly get there? To top it all off, there have even been coal seams that contain carbon-14. Since carbon-14 only lasts about 50,000 years, how can this coal possibly be 300 million years old? Looks like we can bury the evolutionary explanation, but first, I had to investigate. Between 1910 and 1913, Friedrich Bergius was reputed to be the first to synthesize coal in a laboratory from cellulose and smaller quantities of lignin, but all available records of this come from secondary sources. Regardless, he would go on later to pioneer several other chemical processes, including synthesizing oil from coal. In 1931, he shared the Nobel Prize with Carl Bosch for their work in chemistry. In 1983, scientists from Argonne National Laboratory, led by Randall Winans, successfully synthesized coal in only 9 months. To accomplish this, the team isolated lignin from wood. Lignin is a material in most plants that adds rigidity and is very resistant to rotting. The team had theorized that lignin, as well as carbohydrates, were the main constituents of coal. To speed up the transformation and produce the oxygen-free environment required for coal production, the team used mineral clays. From their paper in Organic Geochemistry, it was found that lignin heated with clay materials at 150 degrees Celsius for 2 to 8 months in the absence of oxygen was readily transformed into an insoluble material resembling low-rank coals. They then brought the lignins to 400 degrees Celsius and produced something resembling anthracite, one of the highest grades of coal. It is important to note, however, that lignin does not appear in isolated form in any appreciable amounts in nature, and the mineral clay used to catalyze the transformation is just that, a catalyst used to speed up the reaction that would normally take place at a much slower pace in oxygen-free water. Natural coal is produced under far different conditions. Although the details vary from location to location, the material that becomes coal is thick, waterlogged vegetation like in a swamp that accumulates over a long enough period of time that it becomes a soggy, thick material called peat. As the material accumulates, it creates an acidic, oxygen-free environment which serves as an antiseptic preventing the process of biodegradation. It is this environment which is responsible for the preservation of human cadavers, also known as bog bodies. Found all over the world, these bodies have been dated as far back as 8,000 years. As swamps are found on the shores of lakes, rivers, and saltwater seas, they are also subject to the very common occurrence of intermittent flooding. This results in multiple depositions of sediment that either completely or partially cover the bog. Over time, the swampy area may grow back and repeat the process, or the area may continue experiencing sedimentary deposition until pressure begins to accumulate, squeezing the water out of the peat. As the compressed peat sinks to between 3 and 4 kilometers down, it experiences increased amounts of heat which set off the chemical reactions that generate coal. What Winans' team had accomplished was a successful test of the assertion that under high pressure and heat, lignin and cellulose are converted into coal. The experiment was designed to test the chemical constituents of coal and not to construct a model for natural coal formation, also known as carbonization. Although the grade of coal produced is partially determined by the amount of time involved in its formation, there is no requirement for hundreds of millions of years to produce coal. Whether due to volcanic eruption, migration of a river, or a change in sea level, coal is the product of changing environments. As many swamps are located on the shores of saltwater seas, marine fossils are also to be expected from time to time. After a period of sedimentary deposition resulting in an eventual layer of shale, the area may be home to a drier ecosystem before becoming a swamp again, resulting in dry vegetation within the eventual seam. In a tree-bearing swamp known as a mire, intermittent periods of sedimentary deposition can also result in upright fossils spanning multiple coal and shale layers. None of these processes have ever been asserted to require millions of years. A significant amount of the time required to form coal is the accumulation of peat. This material is deposited at a rate of 2 to 3 millimeters per year. At this rate, it takes about 12,000 to 60,000 years years to accumulate enough peat to form a 3-meter coal seam. Another portion of the time involved is the process of reaching the depths required to produce the temperatures and pressures needed to create coal. The heat at these depths is caused by beta radiation. As this beta radiation bombards the carbon in the coal, it converts carbon-12 into carbon-14. As I discussed in episode 65, carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years, making it practically useless for dating anything older than 50,000 years. This is not because the carbon should no longer exist, but because at that point, the remaining carbon-14 is indistinguishable from carbon-14 resulting from these cosmic rays or the decay of potassium-40, which has a half-life of 1.251 billion years. As many coal seams are accompanied by uranium and thorium deposits as well, there are ample sources for carbon-14 in even the oldest coal seams. In researching for this episode, I was surprised at how badly the Creationist Arguments represented their own sources. Beside misrepresenting Winans' work as having any similarity to natural processes, there is a pervading assertion that George R. Hill had created coal in a matter of 6 hours back in 1972. This was reputed to have been published for peer review on page 292 in the May 1972 issue of the Journal of Chemical Technology, sometimes known as Chemtech. Going directly to their official website, however, I was able to peruse all issues of the journal going back to 1882. As it turned out, there was no page 292 in the May 1972 issue of the journal, nor were there any articles by George R. Hill in the journal at all for the entire year. When presenting a scientific argument, it's common courtesy to provide references to primary sources detailing the actual work of the scientists. It's also courteous to accurately represent the work presented by your sources. When neither of those are presented in your work, you have excused yourself from any credibility as a presenter. A frustrating example of how creationism taught me real science. If there's a creationist argument you think I should investigate, please comment below. It may become the basis for a future episode. In the meantime, subscribe and make sure you don't miss it.